limits to liability, but the facts are there are, and I think it explains once again, this is yet again another example of government failure. Had they not limited the liability, odds are that BP shareholders would not have allowed them to drill where they did, not to mention that BP would not.
But doesn't the government's limitation of liability... You know me, I'm a libertarian, but you just laid out the reason why in certain circumstances you may need government. Just think about what you said before. You said Exxon basically weaseled out of the Valdez cleanup.
No. Exxon paid the Valdez cleanup.
Right. What was the liability?
The Supreme Court, the liability was about $20 billion. The Supreme Court allowed $5 billion in punitive damages. So Exxon paid every nickel and more. As a result of that, Exxon lobbied the Congress so that it could weasel out in the future. My attack is on that limitation of liability statute, which is like a safety net. If you know you only have to pay $75 million in damages, Stuart, you put the $75 million in a bank account, and then you can be as negligent as you want.
Why did the BP executives agree to an open-ended liability situation where they take their money and put it in the control of the White House, give it to political control?
How much cash do they have on hand?
I don't care.
$20 billion is a drop in a bucket today, guys.
When we come back, we'll talk about the cash they have on hand. We'll also talk about the cash that the federal government has blown in Fannie and Freddie. The president addressed the nation last night amid growing concerns how he's handled the BP oil spill. He vowed to make the company pay for the damages it caused and is committed to rebuilding the Gulf Coast.
We must make a commitment to the Gulf Coast that goes beyond responding to the crisis of the moment. I make that commitment tonight.
With me now, more on the president's primetime address and how the public is responding to it. Pat Cadell, former Democratic pollster and Fox News contributor, and Mike Flynn, editor-in-chief at Big Government. Mike, first to you. What should the president have said, if anything, last night? I mean, he's late to the game. BP has to pay the bill. But does he have the right to steal $20 billion of their cash and decide how it's going to be distributed?
Judge, first, let me give you a compliment, because the way you set up this entire segment at the very beginning provided a perfect synopsis for how we got to this place. It was incompetent, intrusive government and crony capitalism that got us here. What the president should have said last night is, here's the 3 things I'm going to do to plug the leak. I mean, this is an unserious administration. You've got the worst environmental disaster in our history going on right now. Right. And the president thought this was a time to, one, beat up on the company and also talk about our long-term energy policy. No, I'm sorry. There's 60,000 barrels of oil a day spewing into the Gulf right now. The speech should have been how we're going to contain that leak.
Pat Cadell, how bad has the president suffered from the perception that he is late to the game in addressing this, and how well or poorly did he do last night?
Well, I think he's suffering a great deal. I think he was already hanging for some months at about 46, 47% Rasmussen, around that number with Gallup. What's happened is, in the last several days, and I don't know how much he corrected last night, it won't be very much because he got criticized, but his numbers on handling this crisis are going down. Judge, I was there for the Iranian hostage crisis. I know this. This is bleeding competence every day. And what Mike said is exactly right. The problem is that people want to see him not have commissions, not see how he's doing the blame, although they're really down on BP with good reason, in my opinion, his biggest contributor from the oil industry. But what they really want is him to do something about stopping the leak. Mobilize the government. For 60 days, they've basically done nothing.
Mike,
our allies have offered to help. They've ignored it.
Mike, what can the government do?
He acts like this is a seminar.
All right, Mike, the government has zero experience monitoring a well in 5,000 feet of the ocean. BP has zero experience monitoring a well in 5,000 feet in the ocean because no one's made them drill in water that deep. What can we expect to happen?
Well, no, the federal government made them drill in water that deep. Let's be clear about that.
Right.
No, they don't have experience. But look, the Dutch have offered assistance. The British have offered assistance. There's been a lot of international assistance offered. The federal government has not accepted that assistance because of some antiquated law passed in the 20s and 30s for labor unions, the Jones Act. We have denied the use of international ships.
Pat?
I'm sorry.
There's nobody in charge. There's nobody in charge.
No.
Mike's right. There's nobody in charge. The people have offered things. Look, we have people we've saw on this network, people who have offered and come up with ideas, whether it's hay or whether it's other things that work. There's no effort to do this. They didn't mobilize the governors. They didn't mobilize the Navy. Let me just put it this way. The country, this is not a PR problem. It's not a communication problem. It's a leadership commander-in-chief problem. And people wanted somebody. Let me just put it this way. Let me just say, whether you like Giuliani or not, Rudy Giuliani, close your eyes a minute and imagine how he would have handled it. If the president says this is like 9/11, imagine Giuliani. He would not be sitting around appointing a commission.
Why is the left angry at the president?
Hang on, Mike.
Pat, why is the left angry at the president this morning?
Well, they're angry because they realize that he is offering nothing. I mean, watching MSNBC or reading what they said last night, it's like watching the Vatican newspaper Observatore Romero criticize the Pope. I mean, they are on top of him, like because he's unfocused. He keeps thinking it's political. And if you think that's bad, read Rolling Stone. Read the New York Times. You'd think George Bush was president, reading how the New York Times in the last 48 hours has attacked
Mike
this president.
Flynn, thank you for joining us. For a true libertarian, free market perspective on BP and the failure of big government, tune in this weekend to Freedom Watch, Saturday 10 and 8 p.m. Eastern, and Sunday 7 and 11 p.m. Eastern on the Fox Business Network. Next, Glenn's new book is called The Overton Window. But do you know the history of this political scale? Glenn explains it coming up. Last night during President Obama's address on the BP oil spill, he turned to focus on the need for energy reform.
As we recover from this recession, the transition to clean energy has the potential to grow our economy and create millions of jobs. But only if we accelerate that transition. Only if we seize the moment.
Is an energy bill the next item on the president's agenda? Joining me now, Chris Horner, author of Power Grab, How Obama's Green Policies Will Steal Your Freedom and Bankrupt America, and my colleagues Liz Clayman, Fox Business anchor. Chris, first to you. What does the president want to do, and how does he want to use the crisis in the Gulf of Mexico to help him do it faster, bigger, and quicker?
Well, it's pretty clear that he showed contempt for all of us last night, Judge, by refusing the dog that didn't bark. He has been saying for 2 years precisely what he wanted to do to us. He has said over and over 8 times that Spain was his model for a green economy, which of course is central planning with withdrawn and rebranded with a splash of green paint on it. And last night, by choosing to omit, now I think for the first time, his European models for the green economy, he's acknowledging what we and some Spanish and some other European academics have been pointing out now for some time. Today in Spain, in fact, as the president was putting on his makeup last night, the Spanish media was going to press with stories noting that the socialist government had given the green jobs industry 48 hours to accept a massive cut in their subsidy, or the jig was up, because it's turning them into the next Greece, bankrupting them, and they can't afford it. The president cited for 2 years Spain as his model. He still wants to do it. He says we have to pump the gas further, not the brakes, despite what happened in all of the train wrecks he used to cite. And last night, by refusing to cite them, finally, I think for the first time, he acknowledged that he knows what he's trying to do.
As Margaret Thatcher used to say, the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of other people's money. Are we to spend? Are we going through the sort of debate that the country went through 100 years ago? Which is better, free choice of individual investors and consumers, or central planning by the government? And is the government going to use one crisis after another crisis after another crisis to make the argument for central planning?
But it doesn't, Judge. It doesn't use a crisis. Go back just 4 decades, okay? We had the oil shock where the Arabs really stuck it to us. And I know you remember where whatever license plate ended in odd or even, you had to wait in line or you didn't get gasoline that day. From that, we learned nothing, Judge. We have no energy policy after this. You know, Chris makes a point, President Obama wants to do this. You know, every president, whether it was Reagan or Bush or President Clinton, brought up, an energy policy. We still don't have it. That's an embarrassment.
Chris, is he going to push for cap and trade? Are they going to tell me that a federal agent has to come and inspect the windows in my private home before I can sell it? And are they going to get that kind of a law passed as a result of the crisis in the Gulf of Mexico?